Elite Physique University, your source for all things physique enhancement.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Elite Physique University. John Gorman, your co-host today, because the lady of the hour, Miss Kayla, has a great presentation for you to go over cortisol. And there are some pretty interesting points that she's going to make here. Kayla has given this presentation numerous times. And this is, Kayla, to me, this is probably, if there's a topic out there that we can just talk about over and over in the different nuances, it's probably this topic. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%, especially when it comes to, anybody. I was gonna say athletes, but like this focuses a little bit more towards athletes, but just anyone in general. Cortisol is a big factor in like why people just aren't feeling good or things go to crap nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah. People that are having trouble losing fat, people that can't sleep right, people that their hormones are out of whack. But this affects so many different things. And I've always said there are numerous things that affect the progress that we want to make. But to me, cortisol, if you can understand that and how it works and what's going on, to me, it's kind of enemy number one. To me, it's like right up there at the top, even though there are some others. So you've got a great presentation. If you want to go ahead and get that pulled up, if you're watching on YouTube, you're going to enjoy this. This is one of our master's class series. We're going to be doing quite a few of these in the trenches so you guys can see it's kind of like a live lecture. And Kayla, what I'm going to be doing is I'll play the role of the listener, the person in attendance at this class, and I'll think of questions as we go
Perfect.
that maybe some of the attendees would ask. So go ahead and get this kicked off.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So I'm going to talk today about how cortisol can affect your hormones. And in this presentation, I've actually used myself as the case study here because this was a big reason of why I got into functional health in the first place. Because as an athlete, I competed naturally for, let's see, 5 years in the natural divisions and everything, and just competed back to back to back, like years between powerlifting and bodybuilding as well. So I really just like did a number on myself. And this is actually how I got into contact with Jason and how Jason helped fix me because I just had all these issues going on. And you'll see in the labs I show you guys about what I go through and why it's such a big effect to me and how it shaped my bodybuilding career altogether. So I'm excited to present with you guys. This is just a little table of contents. We're going to go over, like, start with the basics of what is cortisol exactly, what can affect cortisol, how cortisol affects your hormones, and then going into adrenal fatigue or dysfunction is what people call it nowadays, how that can affect your cortisol, the case study of myself, and then how to fix it. And then when I've presented, we've done open Q&A, but since we're with John today, he's just going to ask questions as we go. So like I told you a little bit about myself already, I have a history of competing plus a very stressful lifestyle at the time. So this what happened in about 2020 to me. So from about 2015 to 2020, I was in undergraduate for a double major. Then I went to graduate school, moved to Fargo, North Dakota, to a city all by myself. I had bought a house on my own. I was going back and forth between competing in bodybuilding, competing in powerlifting, and I just never gave myself a break. And then on top of that, I was working a full-time job. I was training 6 days a week, 3 hours a day, because I needed to prove something to everybody that I could do it, and just let my ego get in the way. And then let's see what else. My dad had had some health issues, had a stroke, so we were going through family stuff as well. So like it was just a lot. And I started to notice these things because I started to have really bad anxiety. I was just constantly inflamed. I was getting acne on my face that was just like not normal. And like you can see this in the picture here of just like my face and like just all over my body just looks inflamed. And I was in prep in this picture. So you can imagine just like how hard it was to prep during that year.
Kayla, can I ask you a question here? There's
Mhm.
going to be, especially on YouTube, there's going to be some females specifically that are going to look at your picture and they're going to think, you look like the model of health. You look amazing. I would do anything to look as good as you do right there.
Mhm.
If you would talk about the outwards appearance of health versus what's actually going on, Because I think that can be a pretty big misconception, don't you?
Oh, 100%. And like in this picture, just to put it in perspective, I think I was probably about 115 pounds, eating maybe 1,600 calories a day. And, I was fairly lean, but I did not feel good. I was stressed all the time, like internally battling anxiety all the time, like wondering, what's going to happen? Like, does everyone hate me if they didn't look at me the right way? All that kind of stuff. And just internally, I just didn't feel good. Like, luckily I didn't have any digestion issues, but I also like I hadn't had a period in like 3 years at this point.
How old were
And
you here?
I was, so this would have been 2020. I was 26.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. So I had been 5 years into competing at this point, and wanting to get my pro card. And so I started prepping this year. And then of course COVID happened. So I would holding it off on and on and on. When are we gonna have a show? When are we gonna have a show? Trying to hold that leanness, not have a gym to train at because all the gyms got shut down. So I was training at a friend's private gym at their home and just trying to make it work. So just a lot of a lot of stress, that's for sure. All right. So to start things out, what is cortisol exactly? So cortisol is a steroid hormone that's primarily made in the adrenal glands. Its main functions are to regulate your stress response, regulate blood sugar, blood pressure, your metabolism, and it suppresses inflammation and regulates your sleep-wake cycle. So if you've ever heard of like the circadian rhythm here down at the bottom, that is important as well for when you wake up to when you go to sleep. Okay. So it starts out in the brain. Sorry, this picture's a little blurry on some parts of it. Starts in the brain and the hypothalamus. That releases corticotropin releasing hormone when you have that stress response happen. That goes to your pituitary gland, which then goes to your adrenocorticotropic hormone into your adrenals, and that releases cortisol to your immune system. So that is what gives you your fight or flight response. So it releases that epinephrine and norepinephrine there. Some positives for cortisol in an acute setting. So like we always think back to like the Stone Ages when we were like living back then, and it's when you're getting chased by a tiger, right? You want to just, oh crap, I have to get away as fast as possible. But then you stop, you make it, whew, okay, I'm alive. But now we have stressors such as like traffic every day, paying bills, relationship issues, like all these types of things, that are everyday stressors. And over time, what happens is all this stuff gets built up over time and it's chronically just elevated all the time and you don't even realize it. But to go back to that short acute response, so it helps drive that inflammation to help recover with trauma. So in that time, like, when we get in an accident or something, we have like a cut, it drives inflammation to happen to help recover and get out of that fight or flight mode, right? So the problem is just when we get stuck there, like I mentioned. So when it's chronically elevated, so we have a perceived stress, a stressful event happening, trauma, long dieting history, for example, overtraining for a long period of time, it can cause that negative effects. And that's when digestive function decreases, your hormone function decreases, your sleep-wake cycles decrease. All this stuff starts to go downhill, and it all starts with cortisol. And now, like, since I've first given this presentation, like we can also say that like digestion and cortisol kind of play hand in hand with each other. Like if one goes off, like if your digestion goes off first or starts to decrease, it can also affect your cortisol because that's a stress response that like your body's trying to make up for. So that's kind of how it works.
Kayla, can you talk about the circadian rhythm and the sleep and wake cycles? Because I think that's probably the one for coaches out there listening, for people that are having trouble going to sleep at night. That's probably the one that's low hanging fruit that people can at least understand and start to fix on how cortisol keeps people up and it interrupts sleep. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have this daily cortisol pattern that you go through. So in order to wake up in the morning, your cortisol has to spike. That happens when you start to see the light come in through your window. You wake up, you feel like normally you're supposed to feel awake, get out of bed just fine, go throughout your day. And then, so it spikes in the morning. And then as it goes throughout the day, it just starts to slower as it goes. And I'll have a graph here in later on in the presentation to show you guys what that looks like. And then at night, it's supposed to be at its lowest so you can go to sleep. And that's also triggered by the light responses to your eyes. So that's why sometimes when we go through this stuff, I always say to like get outside first thing in the morning to get some light into your eyes, get that cortisol to get out there. And then, at night, sleep with some like room darkening curtains, sleep with like a sleep mask over your eyes, anything that you can do to get yourself away from the light, because that light does affect your cortisol pattern. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. I think that helps people understand because a lot of people, they get stuck in that circadian rhythm being off and their sleep sucks and they're doing all these other things to try and sleep better so then they can get cortisol down, but they're not sleeping. So cortisol doesn't get reset because they're not getting enough sleep. So it stays high. It's like this vicious cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And we could do like a whole presentation on sleep itself, but like all in all, sleep is where your body kind of resets itself. So even like I see a lot of women that come through that are like, well, I'm getting like 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, but I still feel like crap in the morning and I feel like I'm tired all day long.
Yeah.
But they're not getting into that deep sleep cycle, right? So
Yep.
that's where cortisol can really play a role in that.
Yep.
So now how does this affect hormones exactly? So like I said previously, it's made in the adrenal glands, okay, and where there's other hormones made as well, mainly DHEA and progesterone are also made there. Progesterone a little bit. There's still a lot of progesterone made in the ovaries, of course, too. But this is regulated by the autonomic nervous system, and it's split into two parts. So you have the sympathetic, which is excitatory. So this would be like your fight or flight. And then you have your parasympathetic, which is the inhibitory. So this is going to bring you down once that fight or flight response is done, brings it down to relax your body. Most people get stuck in that sympathetic stress response as we go, especially when you're under a lot of that perceived stress. It will continue to be sympathetic. Your amygdala regulates your emotions and stress, and that will send a message to your hypothalamus, with which messages the pituitary to keep releasing that adrenocorticotropic releasing hormone. So that's how that cycle continues, especially with emotions. And that's one thing that I learned a lot was like, I need to learn how to regulate my emotions and my
Yeah.
reaction to things, my perceived stress of like, is this really that bad? Because, I tell you about myself, I'm a type A, I'm a perfectionist, all these things that like everything needs to be absolutely perfect, but it really doesn't. I just had to learn how to not do that. And that's the perceived stress part here. And that's what a lot of my ladies that come in have a lot of issues with, is just the perceived stress.
It's interesting. I know we've got listeners. That's probably a huge, huge button that you just push that can be an aha moment. You know what I mean? I've had clients here recently with everything, at the time of this recording, Trump was almost assassinated, right? So the news has just been going crazy over the last 4 to 5 to 6 days. And I had one of my clients and like their weight was really up and they were stressed out. So I was trying to figure out what's stressing them out. And they're stressed out because they're so into the news and they're so into all this stuff going on that he said, like, I'm so stressed out because of everything that's going on in the news and this and that. And I'm like, dude, that's perceived stress. Like you can look at that completely different. I'm not saying don't care about that. I'm not telling you what to be into or not, but you're completely letting these perceived stress elevate your stress. And I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of times, I think Kayla, you nailed it by saying how we perceive things isn't really that bad, no matter what it is, right? Like it can be
Yep.
all kinds of little things.
Mhm.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's something I don't think about when I relate that to clients. So for coaches listening out there, I think Kayla just hit a really good point for everybody.
Yeah. And a lot of it too is like, I'll go through kind of like my general, like, here's how we fix it kind of thing. But each person is very specific and unique in and of themselves. And so, like, I still have to make a whole program and protocol based on that person. And a
Hmm.
lot of times, like, we're working on how do we handle stress? How do you handle those situations when they come up, besides like going and eating food or going to go train? Like, because guess what? You can't train that hard during this phase because we're trying to bring stress down. So a lot of it is just working on daily habits and just like how to actually manage it and not like freak out about every little thing.
Yeah.
So going back to this, like I kind of mentioned in the slide before this, was that in acute phase, the metabolic process for this is helpful. And what happens metabolically is that blood glucose actually rises to allow more food to the brain to process information, because you're in that fight or flight response, so you can process things a lot faster. So it will spike all of that in your glucose to have more go to your brain, if that makes sense. So you also have glycolysis in muscle, which leads to protein degradation to provide energy for fight or flight, which makes your higher blood glucose. So again, in a short response, this is okay. It stimulates the pancreas to release more glucagon, which then stimulates the liver, the pancreas, free fatty acids, and decreases lipogenesis. So lipolysis releases free fatty acids as well to be used as energy. So it releases fats, releases more glucose, so that way you have more energy right away. But when this happens chronically, that higher blood glucose stays up and then it never really comes down. So that in itself can then lead to insulin resistance. It can lead to, pre-diabetes if you let it go too long. That protein degradation in muscle starts to happen. It feeds off of your muscle because it's easier to break down than it is fat. And then it even shuts off your digestion because it kind of overtakes that response. And like when you're in that fight or flight mode, digestion and reproductive system shuts off because your body is in a survival mode. And when it's in that survival mode, you don't need to digest food right away. You don't need to reproduce right away. So it just shuts everything down. And that's kind of how it works and why everything kind of goes to shit when this happens. And I'll show you in the case that I have here about what it did to me. And this graph on the side here is just really cool to know. So all of our hormones are made from cholesterol. So this is why fats, especially for women, are so important, is that everything comes from cholesterol and then it gets made into pregnenolone, which is our mother hormone, is what you want to call it. Pregnenolone then gets broken down into DHEA or progesterone, and from there, or cortisol. And what happens is when that cortisol starts to take over, it starts to favor this pathway here because it just needs more and more and more of it because we're in that fight or flight excitatory state. So it'll shut down all of this. So testosterone, estrogen, down the line, progesterone will all get shut down in favor to make more cortisol to keep pumping that out.
I think that's massively crucial for people to understand. I'm glad you put that graph up. I know people can zoom in a little bit on YouTube now these days if they're watching on their phone. That graph is crucial. I know back when I first learned about this, I don't know, probably like a decade ago, Kayla, we called it the progesterone steal. I don't know if it's necessarily still considered that, but you can see if you look at this graph that if cortisol is super high, your body has to make more cortisol. It's going to make less progesterone and testosterone and thyroid hormone and all these different things. This graph is like the perfect way to understand it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you're right. It used to be called like the progesterone steal. It's not called that anymore because it doesn't necessarily take away from progesterone. It just starts to favor the cortisol pathway. Okay, so here's like a high and low cortisol. So these are different patterns, and then these are how actually it's supposed to look. So this is from a couple Dutch tests, and these aren't either of mine. I think this one was a client's that I had a long time ago. But I wanted to show you the difference here. So there's actually 4 stages. And I think I talk about this actually. Maybe I don't, but we can talk about it now. So there's 4 stages to cortisol and adrenal fatigue. So there's stage 1 and 2, and then there's stage 3 and 4. So stage 1 and 2 are a little bit easier, I guess, to come back from. And this just means that you typically have a high cortisol pattern. This is a normal. I'd say this one's pretty good here. It follows the curve. So you have this high and low range limits. You want it to be in between. You want to follow the curve. This one is a very low curve. So without looking at the DHEA of this one, because those two play a role together in the ratios, this would probably be about stage 3 or 4 adrenaline or adrenal dysfunction. So this is going to be bad, bad, bad. So we want to catch it before this happens because this person is basically making no cortisol at all. And so their body's just so fatigued that they can't even make any more of it, if that makes sense. So phase 1 is going to be acute. So it's very short. This is easy to catch. So it's high cortisol and low DHEA. So your DHEA isn't necessarily having to try to make up for more hormones to be made, because DHEA, if we go back, is the precursor to making testosterone and estrogen as well. Phase 2 is the compensatory phase. This is going to be normal cortisol with low DHEA. So this is where cortisol can look like this, but then when you look at the DHEA of a person, it can be actually low, and then it's not making any sex hormones at all. So that one can be a little tricky to catch. And then stage 3 is the exhaustion phase, with low cortisol and low DHEA as well. So that one's going to not be good. It's going to look like this. And then basically that means your adrenal glands have basically just kind of crapped out, and they're like, just like, we can't even do anymore to keep you going. And stage 4, that one's really bad. That's usually means that you're like, you need to go to the hospital. Like you're pretty close to death, honestly. Some high cortisol symptoms, when you have that, you're going to have a wake up feeling anxious. You're going to have weight gain in your abdomen, insulin resistance, this wired and tired feeling, high blood pressure, hirsutism, which is basically more like male sex characteristics. Like you have some like hairs on your face growing, a deeper voice, things like that, because the DHEA is trying to spike itself up to create more hormone. Okay. Irregular missed periods for women, and extreme muscle fatigue as well. And then the low cortisol adrenal dysfunction is going to be you're waking up tired no matter what, feeling like you're dragging your feet through sand all day. You have a poor appetite, but no weight loss at all. You actually probably gain weight. Again, irregular or no cycle at all. Some insulin resistance, could even be pre-diabetic on your A1C levels. You have edema and water retention. Even though you diet, you don't see any results happen from it, and your strength is also decreasing, and you have muscle wasting. So again, not something that you want to let it get to.
Can I tell you one of the ways I know that there's an issue going on without even seeing labs? And I say this kind of tongue in cheek, joking, but when you're really off this bad in cortisol, like you're just barely producing cortisol, when you drink caffeine, you feel worse. Like I have experienced that numerous times myself. When you have adrenal insufficiency, adrenal fatigue, however you want to label it, drink some caffeine, you actually feel worse. Like you're just digging yourself into a worse hole, which is interesting. Have you ever personally felt that, Kayla?
I haven't gotten to that point. I kind of was at a point at one time where I could drink caffeine at night and go right to bed.
So you were getting there.
I was getting there. Definitely was getting there. And I was like, well, this probably isn't very good. I can drink like 600 milligrams of caffeine a day and I'm still like can go to sleep. So
yeah.
All right. So things that can affect cortisol in your body. So your perceived stress was a big one. We talked about that. So your lifestyle factors are a really big contributor to that. So think about things like your relationships, your living situation, your job, like all of that kind of stuff. That's a really big one, but also very controllable thing that you can do with managing stress and cortisol. Physical stress, of course. So overtraining, not recovering enough. So this is your ladies that are going to Orange Theory 7 days a week, that are doing runs every single morning, HIIT workouts, boot camps, like that kind of thing, CrossFit continuously all the time, never letting themselves get a break. Dieting too hard for too long can be one with that physical stress. So, and also elevated stressors. So physical and mental health can go into that category as well. So you have, with dieting, you have insufficient macros and fats and protein, lower calories for an extended period of time, because we all know those people that have come to us been like, I've been dieting for 6 months and I've lost 10 pounds.
Yeah.
And they just continue to diet. So when the diet stops working, you got to stop, because it's not going to do you any good. And then you have those autoimmune diseases that can also give into it as well. So things like Addison's, Cushing's disease, Hashimoto's, can all affect inflammation, like lupus. That's another one that comes out to the top of my head. So all these things can affect cortisol, which some of them are very controllable. Some of them are not very controllable. So like things like your autoimmune diseases, but they can be managed. So it's just a matter of being aware of it and how to handle it and what steps to take next. So going into the case study of myself here, so this was December 2019 to January 2021. So this took, if you look at this is over a year of like working on this, basically. And like I said, in between this phase, this was like me trying to diet from here and do a show in 2020. I got with Jason in June of 2020 to help fix me. He taught me all of this, and now like I'm like, this is what I want to do, because this, if it was horrible, then like the worst prep you've ever been through. Like it was the worst thing ever. Um, so, but as you can see, like just how I look in these pictures, this is the same weight, I'm pretty positive. And here I just look so much less inflamed. You can see it in my face. I have no more acne in there. I look leaner here versus here. And I have more muscle mass here too as well. So since we took that time off. So Um, here's some of the labs that I had done. I didn't put the whole thing on here because obviously it's going to take up too much space to look at it all, but these are some really important things to look at. So obviously we want to look at cortisol. So I took these fasted in the morning, and mine was a 40.9.
That is I've never seen anything that I've never seen a number that high in
Yeah.
cortisol ever. 19's the top end of the range.
Yeah. Yep, it was bad. And I just remember sending these to Jason and then getting the email back, and all it says in big caps was, these are really bad. And then he went through and listed every single thing that was wrong. And I broke down in tears because I was like, I don't know what I did to myself. I was embarrassed. I was like, how could I do this? Like, I'm never going to get to compete again. All these types of things. And so just kind of going through this just to point out some things. So like my testosterone was clinically low. My free testosterone was on its way down. Cortisol was too high. My DHEA was kind of in the middle, actually, like a little to the higher end. So I would say I probably had about stage 2 adrenal dysfunction. So I wasn't quite where everything was crapping out yet, but it was on its way. Estradiol was only 18. This should be about 100 to 200, actually. So low. Vitamin D was almost clinically low. My progesterone was basically non-existent, and this makes sense because I hadn't had a period in like 3 years. So I was basically menopausal at 26 years old.
This is pretty interesting. And you were young. And the other thing I wanted to point out too, your TSH was a 3.5, which, we all talk about, we want for physique enhancement, just to walk around as lean, as muscular as you can be and healthy. We'd like to see under a 2.0. So high is not better on a TSH, and yours is a 3.5. It just shows how hard your thyroid is trying to work because cortisol is so high. This to me is like the perfect representation of how things start to cascade in a bad direction.
Yep. And exactly it. Like it was on its way down, but it wasn't quite getting there yet. I knew something was wrong. I had been to the doctors and nobody wanted to help me. They just wanted to put me on birth control because I didn't have a period. And they were like, well, maybe you have PCOS. And they're like, oh, nope, no PCOS. Like did all these tests and stuff. They wanted to put me on Accutane as well. So I was on Accutane and birth control at the same time for a little bit. And that was horrible. Felt horrible, looked horrible. It was bad.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Mhm.
Because a lot of people don't have someone like us that will be able to spot this. So they are going to their doctor. Did they have any idea what was, obviously it doesn't seem like they did. They just want to give you birth control and, everything else. No clue about any of this, right?
Nope, nothing. Hadn't ever thought about hormones or like cortisol, how stressed I was. They wanted to put me on antidepressants and give me birth control. That was it.
Yeah.
That was how they were going to treat it
Yeah. Wow. Scary.
and tell me to stop bodybuilding.
Yeah. Scary.
So, unfortunately, that's how the healthcare system works.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did we fix it? And this is typically still how I do things with my clients. I've done things a little bit differently now, since this and since I did it even in 2020. So the first thing is just to rest. Like you just need to chill out and rest for a little bit. So we pulled my training down to 3 days a week. Everything was RPE 7, nothing to failure. I wasn't in the gym for more than an hour. With that too, I did no cardio really. I just did fasted walks in the morning, like outside at like a nice leisurely pace. I implemented things like breath work, meditation, restorative yoga to start to work on that parasympathetic nervous system activity and bring my body back to that center. And like as much as weird as it is, like those things like I never would have done before, but doing that stuff actually helped a ton. And just to help learn how to box breathe, learn how to, when you're getting anxious, how to like just chill out and like let it pass kind of thing. You know, how to manage that is like really, really important. And then we did a flush. And so now we do like a Mediterranean style diet with low inflammatory foods. We do this for 2 weeks with Metapure, Optapure, and then I used Cortis as well to get through that and just to bring the body, just let it chill out for a little bit. So that brings down inflammation. We also cut alcohol, soy, dairy, wheat and sugars, except for monk fruit and stevia. Those are okay. Even coffee, cut all that out. And just like let the body relax a little bit. And then at the same time, during that flush, we bring food up. So we got my food back up. I was, like I said, I was at about 1,600 calories. And we got it up over 2,000. I didn't gain any weight. I think if I remember correctly, I even lost a couple pounds.
Yeah.
Even as I was in prep at the time. So it worked phenomenally. So we also start to add more healthy fats in there, especially with omega-3s to pull down the inflammation, to promote hormone production, all that good stuff. And then as my body was feeling good, you know, we started to keep bumping it as we went. So this was probably a good, we started with 3 months and I got labs again, still wasn't out of the woods. So I had to do it again. So I did 6 full months of doing this and pulling back, training lighter, all these things. And, you know, as a bodybuilder, this just went against everything I had always learned about, like, you have to go harder, you have to go faster, you have to go heavier, like all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I had to just kind of like trust the process and just let it do its thing. And it worked. And then the last thing that we work on through this is the functions part of it. So lifestyle habits. So again, how to cope with stress, finding good coping mechanisms. Basically supplementation was part of it too. So adding in certain supplements to help with my lab work. I know we added Jumpstart in there as well. And then some other, I can't even remember exactly, some other things to help just support my thyroid and just support, you know, creating a good parasympathetic nervous system. So
Kayla, can I ask you a question real quick?
mhm.
For the coaches out there that are working with people in these situations, um, this can be tough, right? For a lot of people to be patient through. Can you talk to that? Can you talk about the importance of patience in this process right here? Because everybody just wants to get back to dieting. They want to get back to pushing. They want to go harder, and it's hard to get them to listen. So when they finally get to the point where you're like, okay, here, we're going to put you through this system to fix it. It's a hard one to work with people as a coach. Can you talk to that for a minute?
100%. Like, I know I went through that aspect of it where, like, the first 3 months, I can accurately say that, like, I was very, like, I just need to get back to it. I need to get back to it. I was so worried about, like, am I going to lose progress? Am I ever going to get to compete again? All that, that it, like, that's part of the reason why I had to do it again. Cause I didn't fully buy into it. So now when I work with clients on this, I always say, like, we have to just fully like trust this process as like counterintuitive to like what you've always known about dieting and like losing weight. Like, your body just needs it because it's in a state of famine so badly that you need to give it what it needs in order to be happy and like just like let go of all of that. And once it does, like, you feel amazing. Like, as soon as I started to really buy into it and stuff. And I just was like, okay, this is just where I'm at. I need to trust Jason and trust that this is going to work. And then it just started to go as fast as it could. And then it was great. So actually buying into it rather than just going through the motions is something that you need to do, and to get your clients, for those coaches listening, to buy into. They need to understand why they're doing it rather than just being like, here, take these supplements, eat all this food. Because even now I have clients that are like still skeptical and like, oh, I need to eat that much food, 2,100 calories. Like, ooh, that's a lot. Like, because every single time they've tried before, even as they've tried to refeed them or reverse themselves, they've still gained weight, but they're just not doing it properly, not with the
Yeah.
right food. So that's why Mediterranean is so important with this.
Yeah, and I think too, sometimes as coaches, we just have these clients that it's just the ones that are real tough, they just won't get out of their own way. They won't be
Mhm.
patient enough. They won't trust the process. And it can make this like these are not fun things to fix to me as a coach. This is not my most fun situation. I don't get excited at night to help clients in this situation, but it's super important to know it because there are people out there that need help. And I see this a lot more than I think people realize. Would you say this is more common than people realize, Kayla?
Oh, 100%, especially with competitors and why I always advocate for lab work, especially, and why I require my clients to get lab work before we're going to compete, and then we get lab work like after we're done competing because I want to see where we're at. Because even and I think it's a big misconception, and this is what I thought too, is that just because you're natural, you don't need to do lab work and it's healthier. It's not.
Yeah,
Bodybuilding is not healthy in and of itself. So you have to be okay with like the things that come with it and have to understand that in order to get stage lean, in order to get to the point where you need to get, you are going to do some damage on your body, but you need to do the right things like this to fix it coming out of that too. Um, so that's how I work it with my clients now. And I mean, I'm grateful that I went through this experience on my own too, because now I can actually like attest to like how bad it sucks and not just preach to them about it. Um, and I even like I just had 4 athletes compete and they're all done now for the year, all natural. And we're all doing a flush after their shows to get their food back up, to get periods back right away. And I've done it with myself and it worked phenomenally. I got my cycle back in 4 weeks, and previously it had taken me like 6 months to get it back.
yeah.
So even after I went through this, I still had to kind of like learn after a prep how to come out of it properly. And um, so yeah, this helps a ton. The flush is amazing. And then that is all I got for you. So, um,
I've got some follow-up questions here. We're gonna leave your
yeah,
contact up for a minute before you unshare the screen. That way, if
sure.
people want to get a hold of you, they can. Our information's in the show notes as well. And Kayla, we always tell people before I get to these questions, we always tell people if they ever want to email us with questions or anything like that, we're not going to put you in a mailing list. We're not going to spam you. We're just here to answer your questions and help. So if you ever want to hear more topics, guests to be on the show, if you have questions for a Q&A or over any of these, just hit us up. We're glad to help. So you've got her contact information there, and it's in the show notes. So if you want to unshare that screen there, I'll ask you one of the questions that popped into
Sure.
my head that I get asked quite a bit, and that is, well, can't I just take some supplements, right? And the way I frame that, the answer is obviously no. But we have a lot of people, and I own a supplement company. You represent a supplement company. Like it'd be very easy for us just to pile supplements on as more of a band-aid. And a lot of people are like, well, I'll take a sleep aid and I'll take Cortis and all that stuff. Um, what's your answer to that? Like, I want you to talk about your take on supplements in this whole thing.
So when I'm going through this with clients and stuff, and they ask, why do we take so many supplements too? Like that's another one that I get is that during this protocol, it is important to take those because they are supplements. Therefore, they are supplemental to what you do in everyday life. So that's why we have to focus so much on the everyday stress management factors and habits of how to do that. And also just your coping habits, your sleep habits, all these things, because that's what's going to keep you going after this is done. Because it's just like any sort of dieting phase. Like when you do keto diet, it works until it doesn't, and then you got to come out of it, right? So it's the same thing with this. Like it'll work. You just have to keep maintaining that afterwards. And with that is the lifestyle factors. Like you can't just keep taking supplements all the time because that's not good for you either. And once this whole phase is done, I pull everyone like off as many as I can just because, we don't need to always have supplements. It's great, but supplements shouldn't be something to be relied on.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too. Like, there's nothing wrong if you're having trouble having, taking a sleep aid to help. But if your cortisol is chronically freaking high, we've got to address the cortisol, not just throw a sleep aid at the problem or just take 2 Cortis before bed. Like, I have my clients do that. At the same time, I have them address the reasons why they're not getting good sleep and why cortisol is chronically high. So if someone's training 5, 6 days a week and every set to failure and force reps and all this stuff, and they're overreached and they can't sleep. Well, I can't just throw Cordy's and a sleep aid at you. We're going to deload and we're going to drop some cortisol. Like we're going to do that. But as you're doing that, here, let's throw a sleep aid in, let's throw some Cordy's in to help through that process. So there's a time and place for supplements, I guess is what I was wanting to get at.
Yep, I agree. Yeah. And just for reference, that last picture that was up that I posted about the contact page, that was winning my pro card the year after I finished all of this. So I did go back, win my pro card that following year as soon as I was done getting all that. And it was the most shredded I was been. And I stayed stage lean for like 3 months because I competed in 4 shows that year. And so that's how great it worked compared to the year before. I like could barely get lean enough to do it.
My final thing to throw out there for you to talk about is imagine if you hadn't fixed this stuff and you had just kept pushing against the brick wall that's not moving for 3 more years, for example. How hard, when we have people that come to us or people listening, how hard is it to then fix when they've gone even farther in the hole than what you were?
Oh boy. At that point, it becomes like you got to chill out for like a year. Like
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, and I always say this to my clients too, is that, you've been having these habits your whole life, or you've been going through these issues for how many years now, and you've done nothing to fix it. It's not going to get fixed in 10 weeks.
Right.
It's not. Like you might get a little better, but it's not going to get fixed. Like for example, I have a client, she's got Hashimoto's and a lot of other issues going on, and she's had it for a long time. And we've been together for 3 months, and we've literally been doing just like low inflammatory foods, having like we included some LDN in there too, her HRT supplements, and then a couple extra supplements to help her, and just pulling back on that. And her TPO AB started at like 1500 and it's down to like 580. And she just sent me those results and she's like, man, it's still high. And I was like, yeah, but like look at where we were at 3 months ago. So
Yeah.
it gets better, but you have to just keep going with it. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer than you think.
Yeah. Well, we've sure enjoyed this master's class. We have more of these coming up. Thanks, Kayla. That was a home run. You knocked that out of the park. Again, if you ever need us, check out the show notes or description if you're watching on YouTube. For myself and Kayla, we're out of here. See you guys.
Bye, guys.